Sono completo.
Sì, sì. Ce n'è uno fuori che sta telefonando, ma sta facendo telefonare al lavoro. La classe è entrata tutta quanta.
Ottimo.
So guys, good evening. Let's move with the second part of the day. This afternoon we will start with Dr. Giuseppe Ottaviano. He works at Enea. It's the Italian Agency for New Technology, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development. Enea is the entity who is in charge for the European Commission for all the CBRN project and the nuclear fusion one, among the others, but I remember those two because I work on it. Giuseppe is the scientific coordinator for nuclear forensic and forensic CBRN operational unit. And we have the pleasure to have him and his entity as coordinator of the P100 for research project we are conducting together. So Giuseppe, thank you very much for being here today with us. I leave you the floor immediately.
Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Andrea said, is Giuseppe Ottaviano. Thank you. I am a physicist and I work as a researcher at Enea Research Center in Bologna, Italy. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to the CBRN Master School Management, and especially to my colleague and friend Alba and Andrea. And I'm very grateful to them for inviting me today here. So I have 2 hours. In these 2 hours, I'm going to give you an overview about nuclear forensics, because nuclear forensics is a wide and complicated subject. So you can understand that, of course, 2 hours will be not enough to explore this wide topic. We will see an introduction, a brief introduction. Then I will talk to you about the radiological crime scene, the nuclear forensic investigation, and the National Nuclear Forensics Library. Of course, you will see a little bit of superposition with the presentation that my dear colleague Eva gave you this morning, of course, because we work in the same field. So a little bit of superposition of overlapping is unavoidable. So, okay. You are attending a CBRN master school. So let's start putting nuclear forensic in this frame. You can see that this is the whole spectrum of the whole CBRN spectrum. And the CBRN spectrum consists of 4 subfields: the biological one, the chemical one, the nuclear one, and the radiological one. And of course, together, the nuclear one and the radiological one constitute the nuclear forensics. These are just the list of the main and the only international organizations that deal with nuclear forensics. Of course, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the former Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, because the work of this organization was stopped in 2022, of course, at the dawn of the war in Ukraine. Now this organization doesn't work anymore for now. Then the Nuclear Forensic International Technical Working Group is I think it's the most active organization, international organization in nuclear forensics. And the Global Forum to Prevent Radiological and Nuclear Terrorism, which is taking the role and place of the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism. Of course, I am a member of all of them, I'm not in staff of IAEA, but I am following all of them since at least 10 years. Okay, when I think and when I talk about nuclear forensics, I like to think about it in its widest meanings. What does it mean? From a technically, there can be a difference between the radiological crime scene management and the nuclear forensics. Basically, this is the model action plan. This is a general guidance on the conduct of a nuclear forensic investigation. Technically, there are some differences between the management of a radiological crime scene and a nuclear forensic investigation. But I like to talk about nuclear forensics in its widest meanings, so that both radiological crime scene management and nuclear forensic investigation are inside this widest meanings. So this is a transition map from the radiological crime scene management and a nuclear forensic investigation. And in this map are highlighted the main steps that you have to follow to realize conducting a radiological crime scene management and then a nuclear forensic investigation. For example, as we will see, this is a very important, the conduct of operation, the examination and analytical plan, the nuclear forensic analysis and interpretation, and, for example, the forensic conclusion. So we will see that talking about nuclear forensics in its widest meanings, it means going from the conduct of operation in a radiological crime scene to the forensic conclusion that can be presented in a courtroom to a judge. Then we will see how to go from the very beginning to that end. This is the very synthetic scheme of a nuclear forensics. You see that, first of all, when a malevolent act takes place, a malevolent act involving radioactive isotopes, radioactive material, first of all, you have to manage a radiological crime scene with on-scene actions and a preliminary categorization. We will see what is a preliminary categorization. And this is the field of radiological crime scene management. After that, starts the nuclear forensic investigation from the establishment of the forensic examination plan to the forensic conclusion in front of a judge in a courtroom. So we will see what is the forensic examination plan. We will see what is the nuclear forensic analytical plan. We will see in particular how important are the categorization and the characterization. We will see the characterization made inside a nuclear forensic certified laboratory. And then we will see another very important step in this investigation, that is the nuclear forensic interpretation. And from the nuclear inside this frame, inside the nuclear forensic interpretation, I will especially talk to you about a very important tool, the National Nuclear Forensics Library. And then I will show you how all these steps can be useful to present in the best way a scientific result to a judge or jury. Because don't forget that for a judge, the ultimate goal is to arrest someone, to prosecute someone. Okay, let's talk about a radiological crime scene. Again, you will see some overlapping and superposition with Eva's presentation this morning, but I already told you that it's quite unavoidable. Let's just read together a definition. This is the definition of a radiological crime scene. A site associated with a nuclear security event may contain trace evidence or activity believed or alleged to have included a criminal or intentional unauthorized act involving nuclear or other radioactive material. Of course, you have already understood the sense of this sentence following Eva's presentation. And this is just the definition of a radiological crime scene from a IAEA publication that I will show you at the references in the end. So, what can happen on a radiological crime scene? A malevolent acts through harmful devices involving radioisotopes. So, radiological crime scene, we can have a malevolent act involving nuclear materials. I'm sure that Eva will already told you about the difference between nuclear materials and other radiological material involved on a radiological crime scene. Okay, so we can have nuclear material, other radioactive material involved, evidences, of course, related to a nuclear and radiological act, for example, footprints, fingerprints, evidences that, of course, in this case, they are most likely contaminated with the radioisotopes. And the radiological crime scene can also be more complicated, for example, due to an explosion of an RDD of a dirty bomb, because you can have a radiological crime scene on which you can find even a sealed radioactive source. Even if it's sealed, it's still a radioactive it's a radiological crime scene. If it is sealed and enclosed in a big shield to avoid the spread of radiation. But the worst case would be an explosion of a dirty bomb. Of course, you know now what a dirty bomb is. You know that it's a conventional explosive, for example, TNT, mixed with, for example, cesium-137 or iridium or any other radioactive isotope suited for this this goal. And of course, you have also to consider the unauthorized possession of nuclear radioactive material. So also the unauthorized possession, I mean the smuggling of radioactive material between a state and a neighbor state. Also this constitutes a radiological crime scene. Okay, so these are all the general cases that we can have to define a radiological crime scene. Okay, when we talk about radiological crime scene, we have to imagine two types of scenarios. As you can see, they are both of them are related to the devices or the situation that can be used and realized on a radiological crime scene. The difference between the two scenarios are these two words, intact or dispersed. Of course, it makes a big difference if you find on a radiological crime scene an intact RDD that not functioned or an exploded RDD. It makes a big difference. If you find on a radiological crime scene an intact and sealed radioactive source or a radioactive source that was opened in order to spread in the environment, for example, a cesium salt, in order to realize the possibility that can be breathed by people, causing a very dangerous harm. So we can have RDD not function for the first scenario type, a radiological exposure device shielded or inactivated, an improvised nuclear device not function, an act of sabotage, and a smuggling, as I told you before. On the second scenario type, we can have an exploded radiological dispersal device, a function radiological exposure device, an exploding improvised nuclear device, an act of sabotage concluded, and the contamination of food contamination. For example, someone can think to put some cesium, for example, into water that can serve a village, a town, and so on. Or someone can, another nice scenario, bad scenario. It could be to burn some cesium salts just in a pan with oil and make it dispersing in the atmosphere, causing a big harm to breathing people. Because of course, once you breathe cesium, even if it's a weak beta emitter, you are condemned. Because the internal contamination, it's almost always without a good ending. So these are the types of situation that you can find thinking about a radiological crime scene. And so you have these two types of scenarios. That was the definition of a radiological crime scene with two types of scenarios. Now let's talk about what you have to do dealing with the radiological crime scene. So the so-called radiological crime scene management. Again, let's read together the definition from the IAEA publication. Radiological crime scene management is the process used to ensure safe, secure, effective, and efficient operations at a crime scene where nuclear or other radioactive material are known or suspected to be present. So even if you are not sure that on a radiological crime scene there is a radioactive material, you have to act there as you would be sure that it is. This, of course, for security reasons. So, what are the primary goals of a radiological crime scene management? The primary goals are three. First of all, the crime scene reconstruction. So, all the law enforcement people that manage a radiological crime scene, all the nuclear forensic experts all together, they have to answer to this general question: what happened? The question seems to be simple, trivial, but answering to these questions, it's not easy. It's not trivial. It's very difficult, as I will show you in the following slides. The second goal is to collect and examine evidences, because of course, if you find some evidences contaminated with radioactive material and you leave them there, someone else can take them and can think to expose the public at another place, realizing a second radiological crime scene. So this seems to be trivial, but it doesn't, because you have to collect in a proper way all the contaminated evidences on a radiological crime scene. The third goal is identifying and prosecuting involved people, because I told you the very end of a nuclear forensic investigation is to put involved people in front of a judge in a courtroom. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy to. Do you think, Risorsa? Do you think we sorry, Sabrina? Do you think we should? Yes, of course, because it's quite hot inside. Yeah, we can open the door, and that door too, please. Yes, thank you. Or maybe that door, yes, and yes, it's hot. I show you. No, we can. Okay, pre-share, so we will not fall asleep, first of all. Okay, let's talk about the on-scene actions, the conduct of operation. There are to face properly the conduct of operations on a radiological crime scene. We have to consider these 5 fundamental and main elements. First of all, time. Of course, because you imagine that people like law enforcement, fire brigades, nuclear forensic specialists are going, they have to go on a radiological crime scene and they have to deal with radioactive materials. But first of all, they have to secure their own health. They have to be safe, first of all. So, time to limit the spend within areas where nuclear or radioactive material is known. So these are these first 3 elements are maybe the most important, because time, distance, and shielding are the 3 elements that you have to realize, that you have to take into account to secure your health, to not be contaminated in the worst way from a radiological material on a radiological crime scene. So distance between personal conducting operation and any evidence contaminated with the radionuclides, and shielding between the evidence and the individual collecting the evidence, of course. I will not show you, but there, because of the time, of course, but there are possible 3 classes of individual shielding, type A, B, C, maybe 4 classes. Fire brigades know very well how those suits you were going on a site. There are 4 classes of A, B, C, D. It depends on the PPE, the personal protective equipment you have to use on a radiological crime scene. Of course, then we have to consider the contamination, monitoring on airborne radionuclides, because
Shielding, let me see, shielding
in this case, shielding it means literally in Italiano is schermatura. But schermatura in Italiano, you have to intend this word in the widest meaning of the in the widest meaning, because schermatura can be a layer of lead between the source and you, but can also be that heavy suits you wear that can protect you from breathing air contaminated with the radionuclides. So you have to intend these words in its widest meanings, not only lead or aluminium or concrete between a neutral source and you, but also what you wear to operate on a radiological crime scene. Then contamination, because you have to monitoring the airborne radionuclides, because I told you, I worked on a nice fake scenario last year, where some criminals selling some hot dogs to people in a big pan. They mixed with oil this cesium 137 in order that it was burned and dispersed in the atmosphere. This is the case, monitoring airborne radionuclides. And then exposure, of course. In general, you have also to control the individual radiation exposure using portable particle detectors and so on. So always consider these 5 elements in managing a radiological crime scene, always. So I told you that those first 3 elements, time, distance, and shieldings, they are the fundamental elements to realize the optimization of radiation protection to reduce exposure to radiation. Not only those 3 elements, time, distance, and shielding, but also the ALARA principle. That is, ALARA stands for as low as reasonably achievable, taking into account economic and social factors. And this ALARA principle is the guiding principle for the optimization of radiation protection. So these 5 elements, again, contribute to the optimization of radiation protection to reduce exposure to radiation. The ALARA principle is a general principle that is always applied in radiation protection and dosimetry. Just to make it more clear, when you are suspected to have a cancer, unfortunately, in order to be sure, you have to be to get, for example, a PET, a positron emission tomography, for example. That means that the doctors have to put inside your veins radioactive substance, radioactive material that then can produce the 3D reconstruction of your body. So you are suspected to have a cancer, but you have to take into your body a radioactive material. It's necessary. This is the balance. This is the optimization. Okay, you can have a little bit of radiation dose, but with a little bit risk, we can know where the cancer is, and we can immediately intervene, maybe for a surgery, and we can save your life. This is the balance of the ALARA principle. Okay?
It's the same for contrast analysis, so for the brain.
Exactly, but not, for example, for an MRI scan, because for the MRI resonance, for the MRI scan, the contrast liquid used is not radioactive. Only if you go for PETs or if you go for a TC scan, a TAC. For a TC scan, of course, you get a lot of X-rays. They are harmful too. They are, in principle, they are able to break your DNA. It depends on the energy, of course. But again, this is the balance. You can have a little bit of doses to know where the problem is inside your body. But of course, again, if you get a little bit of dosing, in most cases, your body is able to repair itself. Okay, what is the, I told you in the second slide, what is the event action plan? Again, let's read the definition from the IAEA. The event action plan consistently defines the action to be taken during the operational period. And the on-scene operational commander is responsible for this event action plan. The event action plan specifies the overall objective of on-scene operation, the goals associated with meeting this objective, strategies and tactics, task assignments, and relevant safety and medical guidance. This event action plan and the on-scene operation commander are the 2 concepts that have to be put in this frame, the integrated, the national response plan. The national response plan defines the integrated command structure that consists of 3 levels: a national strategic command level, a local tactical command level, and on-scene operational command level, as you've seen on the previous slide. And these are the roles and responsibilities for each one of the 3 levels: national level, local level, operational level. This is an example of the integrated command structure, starting from the national strategic level, going down to technical level, national technical level, until down to the operational national operational level. As I will show you at the end, all these concepts are described in 2 IAEA publications. But be careful because those publications describes not all this useful concept, but of course they need your experience to go deep inside the subject. For example, what are the type of personnel involved in radiological crime scene management? We can have, for example, the on-scene operational commander that in the previous slides is he has the responsibility of the coordination of the response at the scene. We can have, for example, the hazardous material operations specialist that who helps to identify hazardous material and to monitor the scene for the presence of the hazardous situation. The safety specialist who coordinates with the hazardous materials operation to identify hazardous conditions and situation and to supervise the initial entry on the radiological crime scene. Then we can have the radiological assessor. The radiological assessor is who has the duty to advising hazardous material operation specialist on the development of hazard risk assessment and the selection of the PPE, the personal protective equipment. Then we can have the scene modeler who prepares diagrams of the crime scene. All those figures that should operate on a radiological crime scene, they are very, very important. So if you think to organize the work on a radiological crime scene, never ignore not even one of these figures inside the management of a radiological crime scene. The evidence recovery personnel, very, very important. I told you to recover the contaminated evidence, to ensure them. And I'm sure that this morning Eva showed you how to take contaminated evidence from a radiological crime scene, how to put them in a double envelope, how to wear double gloves, and blah blah like that. Eva, I'm sure she showed you in a very detailed way all these actions. Then we have photographers. It's very, very important because you need a very detailed image, a picture of what was the radiological crime scene before, during, and after the operations. And finally, the evidence recorder custodian that prepare the evidence recovery log. So only in this way you can manage in the best way the radiological crime scene. For example, this is an example of radiation detection instruments that can be used for assess a radiation safety hazard. You can have a gamma and neutron dose rate meters for source monitor, area monitor, map radiation fields. You can have also, of course, passive dosimeters to put on your chest for personal dosimetry. You can have continuous air monitoring for monitor airborne radionuclides. Don't forget the case of a cesium burn in a pan. And this is an example of radiation detection instruments for use in on-scene material identification, because, of course, one of the most important things that you can do, that you have to do, managing a radiological crime scene, is the identification of the radioisotope. What are we dealing with? Cesium-137, iridium, uranium, and a lot of radioisotopes. So you can use a low-medium resolution gamma ray spectrometer to identify gamma-emitting radionuclides. High-resolution gamma ray spectrometer to identify again gamma-emitting radionuclides. And you need some equipment, devices, and tools to perform quantitative analysis and to characterize what is uranium and plutonium. So managing the radiological crime scene never is an easy work. That's why you need to collect, to put together a lot of people with a lot of expertise from law enforcement, from also from conventional crime scene experts, nuclear crime scene experts, a lot of people together to manage in the best way a radiological crime scene. Okay, that was radiological crime scene and radiological crime scene management. That was the first step of the whole nuclear forensics in its widest meanings. Now let's talk about the second part, that is the nuclear forensic investigation. So after the radiological crime scene has been released, after all the contaminated evidences have been collected, what should we do from that point? To go to put your result on the desk of a judge in a courtroom. Again, let's read the definition from the IAEA. Nuclear forensic science is a subdiscipline of forensic science and is referred to as nuclear forensics. So, if you remember the first slide, I showed you the CBRN spectrum with 4 subfields, and together the nuclear and radiological subfields are together a subfield of the CBRN spectrum, but not only. Nuclear forensics is also a subfield of the forensic science, together with traditional forensics. Nuclear forensics is the examination of a nuclear or other radioactive material or of evidence that is contaminated with radionuclides in the context of legal proceedings under international or national law related to nuclear security. So don't forget that a nuclear forensic investigation has to put in the frame of a legal proceeding. The analysis of nuclear or other radioactive material seeks to identify what materials are, how, when, and where the materials were made, and what their intended use were. So these are the main questions that a nuclear forensic investigation tried to answer. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. These are the main questions for a nuclear forensic investigation. Now let's go a little bit deep inside the nuclear forensic investigation. I will show you what is a forensic examination plan, a nuclear forensic analytical plan, and the nuclear forensic interpretation. After the preliminary on-scene categorization of a nuclear forensic or other radioactive material, there is a forensic examination plan that is a document, a plan that have to be prepared by investigating authority in consultation with the relevant laboratories, including designated nuclear forensic laboratory. And there is congratulations. The forensic examination plan has 2 goals. The first one is to describe the requirements of the contamination that have to be conducted in support of a potential criminal prosecution. And the second goal is to describe the sequencing of examination. This is a general document, but it's necessary to show experts that the main route that they have to follow in performing a nuclear forensic investigation. So what is a categorization? A categorization is performed to identify nuclear security implication and the risk of the seized material to the first responders, law enforcement, personnel, and the public. So we can have a first step on scene, on the radiological crime scene, with portable gamma spectrometer, for example, that can be useful to identify the specific radioisotopes involved on the radiological crime scene. And then we can have, this is a preliminary categorization on scene. And then we have a proper more detailed categorization inside a nuclear forensics laboratory, where we can have, of course, more sophisticated gamma spectrometry systems with greater sensitivity and resolution than the previous one. So we can have gamma rays. Of course, these more sophisticated devices are able to detect, to measure gamma rays with smaller abundances and with energies much close to each other. So in order to discriminate peaks very close to each other. This is the concept of the categorization. Then, what is a nuclear forensic analytical plan? In support of the previous general document, it's necessary, each forensics laboratory should prepare an analytical plan to describe the type of analysis that will be performed inside the laboratory in order to meet the requirements of the investigation, to describe the sequencing of the analysis pertaining to nuclear or radioactive material. As the categorization was an essential element of the previous general document, the characterization is a fundamental and essential element of the nuclear forensic analytical plan. So let's see. For example, this is a sample types that could support a nuclear forensic analytical plan. For example, you can perform bulk nuclear or radioactive material, and you can see the potential forensics value. Identify possible material origin. This is very important, for example, as we can see. And this is the examination requirements, capability and infrastructure for handling and the characteristic bulk radioactive and nuclear materials, and so on. So you have here a sample type, items contaminated, biological samples, urine, blood, hair, tissues, environmental geological samples, with the potential forensic value for each one of them, and the examination requirements. So what is the characterization? So categorization for the forensic examination plan, characterization for the analytical plan. The characterization is the determination of the nature of the radioactive material and associated evidence. And this process has this main goal to determine the physical characteristics, the chemical and elemental composition, the isotopic ratios, and of course it may include identifying major, minor, and trace constituents. These three steps are very important for the next phase of a nuclear forensic investigation, which we can see is the nuclear forensic interpretation process. Without these measurements, without this physical, chemical, and isotopic measurement, you couldn't find, for example, the potential accomplices that contributed to realize a radiological crime scene. And these are some of the analytical techniques used for characterization: imaging, bulk analysis, microanalysis. And the characterization typically does not include the traditional analysis as in interpretative steps. And the characterization will take less time than the full interpretation, because as I will show you, the full interpretation is a very long and complicated process. This is a summary of characterization measurement. For example, you can have in this first column the technique method, and then that have to be conducted within 24 hours, 1 week, or 2 months. This timeline was suggested by the ITWG, the Nuclear Forensic International Technical Working Group. For example, you can have the physical characterization, for example, the optical microscopy density in 24 hours, and then an X-ray diffraction in 1 week. So this is a very useful table to take into account for your measurement inside the characterization process. Okay, now let's talk about the nuclear forensic interpretation. This is after the analysis and the measurement inside a nuclear forensic laboratory. Imagine all the technicians, all the scientists measure everything about the contaminated evidences, physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, isotope treasure. After all those measurements, starts the nuclear forensic interpretation. So comparing the results of material characterization with signature combination from process information, this provides an understanding of how the material may have been made and its original intended use. So with this process, we can start answering those 5 questions I showed you in the previous slide that are the fundamental questions of a nuclear forensic investigation. So again, the nuclear forensic interpretation is a process of comparison. So essentially, you have an MORC, a material out of regulatory control. So you have a MORC, a material out of regulatory control, and this material have to be compared with existing information. We will see what does it mean, existing information, pertaining to type of material and origin and method of production and so on. So at the end, the interpretation process is just a comparison between 2 sets of information. But as you can see, this comparison, it's not trivial. It's quite complicated, but it's fundamental to produce results that can be presented to a judge in a courtroom. For example, imagine you to go in front of a judge in a courtroom and to say to him, in our opinion, we are confident that 85% that this radioisotope is responsible for that harmful effect. The judge can ask you. So it's not 100%. So the case is this. No, because from a scientific point of view, and you know because you are scientist, 85%, for example, it means a very high probability that your result is good. So the difficult thing is to present in the right way this scientific result that mostly with uncertainties to a judge. Your duty, your role is to make him understand what does it mean that the 95% probability that you have 95% confident that was the right isotope, that the things went in a certain way. This is not easy. Let's read together. This is a few sentences took from the ITWG guideline on National Nuclear Forensics Library that I just wrote for the ITWG. In the framework of a nuclear forensic investigation, the nuclear forensic interpretation is an important analytical process that follows the laboratory analysis phase. Is analytical. Don't confuse this type of analysis with the analysis in the lab. Inside a nuclear forensics laboratory, you analyze something, for example, the contaminated evidences, measuring physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, isotopic ratio, and so on. This analysis in the frame of the forensic interpretation is it means calculations, mathematical formalization of the problems, as I will show you later. So the nuclear forensic interpretation involves comparison of the results from analysis of the nuclear sample carried out in laboratories with information of the corresponding characteristic of the existing or known radioactive MORC. In other words, the objective of the nuclear forensic interpretation is to interpret the analytical results from a laboratory and to formulate nuclear forensics finding in response to nuclear forensics examination plan. Okay, let's go a little bit deep into this subject, and let's see how all these issues can be addressed. So I told you it's essentially it's a comparison. The nuclear forensic interpretation process provides the context to properly interpret the results from a nuclear forensics analytical labs. And it consists in comparative analysis between the archived and nuclear radiological material and evidences from a radiological cuisine. So you have, here you have the contaminated evidences that you collected on a radiological crime scene. And here you have the existing information on known nuclear and radioactive materials. What are these? Of course, you understand what a contaminated evidence is from a radiological crime scene. But in your opinion, what could be this existing information on known radioactive material? Please answer to me. What do you think these information are? What do you think this information can come from?
Scientific research.
Perfect. Perfect. You just said the magic word, library. But where should be this library? What type of library are you in mind?
Something like a scientific sample library. So it comes from the research and at the national and international level. Standardized.
Yes, right, but not only from a research. Because you imagine that in your country, in Italy, I don't know, in Asia, in your country, can be several producers of radioactive sources. Of course, each of them can have a list of producing of the produced radioactive level. Altogether, these manufacturers, hospitals that can have a list of the radioisotopes in the radiopharmacy, nuclear research reactors, industries that then can use radioactive isotope for sterilizing food, for example. They all should have a list of all the radioactive materials stored inside. All together, these are the information of known materials in your country. Exactly. For example, in the frame of a radiological crime scene domain, of course, we can have, as I already showed you, these 5 types of explosive and situations. Going from the radiological crime scene domain to the prosecution domain, the very end of the ultimate goal of the prosecution domain is the criminal arrest. Going through the nuclear and traditional forensic examination. So on these 3 red points, there is the nuclear forensic investigation. So the whole process from a radiological crime scene domain to the criminal arrest. But is this the end? You imagine to arrest the perpetrator, you imagine to arrest the individuals that put that cesium in the pan that was spread in the atmosphere. Okay, you arrested it. That's all. Let's go to bed. No, this is not the end. Because, of course, I guess that in the room are some law enforcement individuals. Who be among you are from law enforcement? You. Good. So, when you arrest a criminal, is this the end of a prosecution?
No, you need to bring him to trial.
Yes, of course, but before going to a trial.
Yeah, you do the investigation.
Exactly. Because why? Because the criminal you arrested, you don't know if it's the only one.
And if is it the right one?
Exactly. And even if it's the right one, you don't know if it's the only one. That's why the arrest of the criminal, the perpetrator of the malevolent act, is not the end. Exactly. We don't know if it's the only one. So the criminal investigation may continue thanks to the nuclear forensic interpretation. We arrest a criminal, but there can be an accomplices. For example, we imagine that an accomplices of the perpetrator can have stolen radioactive source and can have given to it to realize the malevolent act. So if you arrest a criminal, in principle, at that point, you don't know if there is an accomplice inside a radioactive source factory, a nuclear power plant and research reactor, a nuclear storage, a medical isotope production facilities, and hospital radiopharmacy industry. So you have to do more investigation in order to understand where, if there is an accomplice, and where these accomplices can hide inside of these structures. How to do that? So arresting a criminal is just the first step. So here, and a criminal arrested, you have all your results from a nuclear laboratories with physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, isotopic ratios, and blah, blah, blah. This process, the nuclear forensic interpretation, provides the basis for the nuclear forensics finding. It can lead, among others, to two types of results. We can, for example, the first type is establishing linkages between materials and production on manufacturing processes. Of course, first of all, you have to understand where the radioactive sources of the radioactive power, where they come from. The second type of results is to contributing to confidence in nuclear forensics findings. What does it mean, confidence? Confidence, it means not only the uncertainty related to each numerical result, but also the confidence that you can present in a courtroom to a judge. Your Honor, I am confident at 90% that things went in this way, that this is the radioisotope, and so on. So you have these two main type of result. The first one can lead you to possible linkages between people, and the second one can lead you to the best legal proceeding, to conduct the legal proceeding in the proper way. So the nuclear forensic interpretation process tries to answer the following questions. Question one, what type of material is involved? Two, what is the possible origin of the material? Three, what are the probable method of production? Four, when was it manufactured? All these questions can help you to establish possible linkage between people and, of course, between materials. First of all, between materials, and then linkages between people. So a linkage between the perpetrator and a hidden accomplice hidden inside a radiopharmacy of an hospital, for example. Okay, how to do that? But before showing you what is a National Nuclear Forensics Library, let's have a break. Okay, they told me 10 minutes. Okay for you? Yeah. Or you prepare 5 minutes? Maybe 4? Okay, thank you.
Really fine.
يا اخي والله ما انا اشوفك عوشك عوشك لا بس اربع سنين
Thank you. Almost regular.
Everything that I told you. Everything that I told you.
Gianni, almost all
The change. Yeah. Next time. Yeah, because it's so nice.
Excellent.
Anyway, also. I try to believe it. And the feeling because I saw the things I'm not knowing it's stuff. I saw who to it was so very glad this you know. Anyways. It's good. Anyway, so very bad, but no, just because of yesterday. That's the I don't have a scan sleep. No, I was here in the dormitory. One time at the university. So it was okay. The room was amazing, like in the films.
But you didn't mention.
Yeah, it's just my leader on say like no place the first night it was okay. Yeah, but I have a flight today evening. Maybe I can change the flight to anyway, no, the university was trying to invite they invited this. One of my colleagues asked me why I didn't ask them to stay or me to stay a little bit. Yes, yes.
At least about 4 minutes.
4 nights, yes.
Did you already get
No, not yet, because I still the deadline.
I will send you.
So if you can send
You can find. You can find a lot of side.
yes, I could see, just I haven't checked yet.
But
The deadline is coming. Okay, okay. Excellent, thank you very much. Will be great. This also goes to, I didn't check. But the venue of the, so same situations.
okay. The venue's in the very city center.
Okay, good, good. Just because I what is close to the main station, but maybe because of the low fat ones. Thank you. This Thursday is first of June?
Yes, but no.
July, sorry.
Yeah, but what was
30. Then depends on the flight, I haven't checked yet, but 30. They already be. I will check the.
if you
Because I haven't started yet the official process.
okay, if you come on the previous stage of 29,
Yeah,
it will be easier to me to pick you up here.
Okay, good. Then I will check.
Let me know.
Do you know probably that in a direct flight from Budapest, like visa? I will check actually. Anyway,
The direct flight.
I am not sure. Yeah. Anyway,
Maybe you, maybe,
but
maybe you have to change the now.
okay, doesn't matter. I will good to speak about it because I will start in the system, an electronic system for the travel. So I will start visa. No, I'm just thinking Wizz Air, the air company, Wizz Air. Not visa, I don't need, I also in the European Union.
That's right.
Visa,
What's the price?
you know, the Germans call it Witz, air, and Witz in Hungarian is joke.
Oh,
Like
no.
it's joke and joke.
No, that's why, because I say with.
Uh-huh. Witz, yes, Witz.
That is.
I don't know in Hungarian, just visa. It's that.
It doesn't matter. If you use it.
I can imagine maybe there is a direct flight that I have to check visa or right. I will check.
Because on the 30th, maybe it will be difficult because I need to be there to organize a meeting.
Of course.
Because if you come the Tuesday,
Yes.
it would be easier for you to pick up.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will let my institute know and then they will organize this. And the last day is third.
Yeah.
So evening or noon, as I remember. I haven't seen any agenda yet. But
Between 5, 6 p.m. If you like.
okay, then we can travel
There
there.
is more yet. Not.
I know. They are working on it. I know because they asked me to tell because I will give a presentation about forensic examination of sealed sources, neutron sources. I was thinking on like general topic like our response plan, response capabilities, or neutron sources, and they told me, okay, neutron source is better because it's more scientific.
Yeah.
Do we speak about sealed sources?
No.
Okay,
Talking about neutrons.
neutron sources.
No,
So we investigated 25 neutron sources for forensic. So I mean gamma stack neutron measurements, XRF, X-ray diffraction, no, not diffraction, tomography.
Not even overlapping because I'm working, I would like to recently work on the compact neutron generator.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, for
Uh-huh.
effective interrogation,
Uh-huh.
a new type of compact neutron generator.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But in my mind, it's just a month to complete and
Yeah. I don't know, I cannot use it, but I know what it's. So.
yeah. So that's my goal.
Not just different.
Yeah,
It's completely different.
no, but good.
My colleague used maybe Monte Carlo, but I think it is not in the presentation itself. Because we had to,
Better.
he wrote no, small bit, I don't know, you know, not the dark matter. There is another Peter. The small Peter, he's a young PhD student and he's a physicist and he's very talented in this everything, like Monte Carlo and simulations and mathematical things, and he's a gamma expert.
Okay.
So he's using Monte Carlo sometimes, but I don't remember.
Sure.
He prepared for me for this topic, main principle component analysis, the PCA. The statistical.
Yes.
Yes, exactly, for the sources, yes, based on some information from gamma spec. No, this is for IT music, not for no. And by the way, I'm a little bit worried because gamma spec is totally not my field. So I will tell somehow this topic, but this is not my field. I know how to say main characteristics of the sources, the XRF and X-ray tomography, and the conclusions, forensic findings, but not the gamma studies.
This is pretty. Yeah. This.
Oh, really? Yes, I will give the word to give this part of the presentation. It's a Hungarian material.
But at least it should be.
No, but it's Hungarian research. He brought this topic, he brought to the type of the
That's the same thing.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. So. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, was it a positive or the emotional one? No. Yeah, I remember we spoke about it in Jordan. Jordan for when I heard she applied for the position. Anyway, she will be better than
Yeah, so
she is kind actually. Everybody likes the last one. Beautiful lady, blonde lady. No, she is. I have a good relationship with her. Anyway, but and she was also said that she told me her application was also rejected for some reasons. She was invited for a more CSM course as a to give lecture about the radiation basics. Actually, this and her expert invitation was rejected between us. She told me rejected with the what is it? Reason. The reason was that her expertise is not over in the field related to our system. And this is not about your identity, it's also coming from the emotion. Which is very, I don't understand maybe, but Peter Wörthersche was also invited for our system course last week in Argentina. Giving a lecture about foundation and basics and fundamental foundation fundamentals. Yeah, anyway. Yes, it's a free route.
I mean, they'll take you from that.
No, appena rientrato. Okay, let's start. Now I'm going to talk to you about the most complicated subject, most technical subject. National Nuclear Forensics Library. So, how to address the nuclear forensic interpretation issues we have just seen, all those problem questions and blah, 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 in the frame of a nuclear forensic interpretation process. One of the main I would like to say the main tool to address those issues is the National Nuclear Forensics Library. What is a library? NFL, National Nuclear Forensics Library. It's a fundamental tool in nuclear forensic interpretation, and it is a collection of information. Of course, what a library is a collection of information, but it's not just a database. If you think about a database, an Excel sheet with numbers, that's not an NFL. It's not just a database. When you when you talk about a National Nuclear Forensic Library, you always have to think about a database plus an expertise. As you will understand, the expertise is fundamental to build, to create, to interpret, and to query a database. The National Nuclear Forensics Library allows to evaluate whether or not an MORC is consistent with nuclear materials stored or used within a state. I told you the case of all those radioactive sources stored or used within a state. It allows to compare characteristics of samples from a radiological crime scene with signature of existing known materials in your state. And it has a very important role in contributing to confidence in nuclear forensics findings. So we are going to see how to create a National Nuclear Forensics Library, how to query a National Nuclear Forensics Library, so how to compare the samples in a National Nuclear Forensics Library with your MORC samples. So these are the types, just an example, types of information that you can have inside your database. Type of encapsulation. For example, you have a list of sealed radioactive sources. The manufacturers, of course, list the types of encapsulation, the capsule geometry, the country of origin, the manufacturer itself, if it's sealed or not sealed, the type of radioisotope, of course, the decay time, the activity, the chemical composition, the isotopic composition, all the administrative information. All this information come from the nuclear radioactive material stored or used inside radioactive source factories, nuclear power plants, research reactors, storages, medical isotope production facilities, hospital radiopharmacies, industries, and also uranium powder. So you can have in your database hundreds or thousands of radioactive source types, your samples. You imagine hundreds of thousands of samples and tens or hundreds of information for each samples, useful to uniquely identify each samples. You imagine that all this information can uniquely identify one sample, just one sample in your library, in your data set. So imagine to have hundreds or thousands of samples, or each of them with the 10th or 100th of information for each sample. So what do you have? A big databases with imagine a worksheet on Excel with 100 or 1,000 of rows, and tens of thousands of columns. So this is the best way to create, to arrange all the information about the nuclear and radioactive material used or stored in your country. So the known materials, the known radioactive sources in your country. For example, for each sample, you can have the physical parameters and the chemical parameters, just for example. So you can have the radioisotope, the half-life, the geometric dimensions, the activity, the fuel form, the fuel enrichment, and so on. And you can have the compound state, the compound formula, the elemental composition, the molecular structure, all this information for one sample, for each sample. Together, the physical parameters, the chemical parameters, and the general parameters and the administrative parameters, all together, they constitute the signature for each sample. So you imagine how many information you have for each of your hundreds or thousand samples. It's a huge database, very huge. How to manage it? It's not easy. Okay, I'm showing you how to manage it, and the method I'm going to show you, it was developed by our team in Bologna, by the team of the Nuclear Forensic and Forensic CPR and Operation Unit at a research center in Bologna. This was the search methodology. So, in general, both the NNFL database and the MORC dataset can include a large number of data. So you imagine that you can have two databases. The National Forensic Library with the known radioisotopes in your country, and the material out of regulatory control, because on a radiological crime scene, you can find one source, one radioactive source, but you can find, imagine, a big box with hundreds or thousands radioactive pellets inside. So you can have two huge databases, the known sources in your country, and for example, the radioactive pellets retrieved in a garden, and you have to establish their origin, and so you have to answer to all the questions we saw. So you can have two big data sets, and you have to assess the consistencies by looking for correspondence between a set of MORC samples and an NFL samples, with the goal of narrowing down the investigation's fields by subsequent steps until the minimum numbers of samples is found with the maximum number of positive correspondences. Because you can have comparing samples, you can have positive correspondences and negative correspondences. For example, the geometrical dimension, they correspond, yes or not? The activity, it corresponds, yes or not? So you can have positive correspondences and negative correspondences. Your goal is to find the minimum number of samples with the maximum number of correspondences. And this again, this synthesis was from the guideline I wrote for the ITWG. So this is the investigation field. This is how to structure from a formal point of view all this step of this proceeding. The investigation field can be defined as the subset IFG of the NNFL samples and parameters found at the end of some investigation steps. So playing with this positive and negative correspondences, the goal is to narrow down with these subsequent steps, to narrow down the investigation field, starting from the biggest one. And the goal is to get the smallest investigation field with the minimum number of samples and the maximum number of positive correspondences. Only that way you can produce at the end a scientific sentence about the probability that your seed sample can correspond to one or more samples in your National Nuclear Forensics Library. This is how to, this is again, all these equations are from the same guidelines. This is how to, the best way to arrange, of course, such a database is creating a matrix. So you have, in this column, you have your samples of the National Nuclear Forensics Library. So from 1 to M, you can have hundreds of thousands of samples stored or used in your country. And for each samples, you can have N parameters. Those parameters I showed you, not only physical and chemical parameters, also administrative, name of the manufacturer's activity, geometrical dimensions, blah, 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 blah. So for each sample, you can have a lot of parameters. Of course, this matrix, these tables can be formalized into a matrix like this one. This is the example of the table for an NFL database. The same thing you have to do on an MORC seized radioactive source. Again, imagine to find buried in a garden a big box with a lot of small radioactive pellets. Where do they come from? Who put them inside the ground in that garden? You have to answer to all of this question to complete your investigation. So the same thing you can do with a more set samples, and for each samples a lot of parameters, and this again is the mathematical formalization of the table. And this is a quite complicated problem, because you imagine to have a database with hundreds, thousands of samples and hundreds of parameters. From a statistical point of view, the management of such a huge database, a large number of samples is described by many parameters, is a typical multivariate statistical problem, where each sample can be described by a set of many correlated random variables, so the parameters, and it can be useful to reduce the number of variables from hundreds or tens to a few units. Of course, the best way to manage such a huge data set is to reduce its dimensions. And from a formal point of view, this is a mathematical statistical very complicated problem. This is the statistical approach to your database. But we have also a geometrical approach to your database. From a geometrical approach, a huge matrix, for example, the first one, can be associated to a multidimensional vectorial space, where each matrix element can be represented by a point and a vector in the n-dimensional space of the variables, and it can be useful to reduce, of course, this huge set of information from hundreds or 10 to a few units. Because if you let's go back to one of those tables. What does it mean? This one. For example, you have a lot of parameters. Applying those statistical and mathematical and geometrical methods to this table, what does it mean? That you can have, for example, for this parameter, all the values inside this column can be very little different from each other. If you have a column like that, for the whole system, a column of almost constant values is useless, it's not effective. And therefore, those methods can allow you to eliminate one of these columns. You can ignore them, reducing the space in which you are going to work to manage your huge library. That problem can be addressed using special statistical techniques. For example, the principal component analysis is a very special and powerful statistical and at the same time geometrical tools that can be used to manage in the best way, in the proper way, a very huge database that can be the National Nuclear Forensics Library. The principal component analysis can allow you to manage multivariate random variables, selecting a smaller set of the most statistical significant variables. What does it mean, most statistical significant variables? I told you, if in a column you have almost constant values, you can ignore them because they cannot give they cannot give a contributor to the variability of the host system. To manage the multidimensional vectorial space, to highlight cluster of sample for both an NFL database and a mock dataset, because one of the results of the PCA analysis can show you clusters of information. You can have, for example, the clusters of your cluster of samples inside of your national reference library, a cluster coming from an industry, a cluster coming from a specified manufacturer, and then you can have clusters or points, if they are few, of your MORC samples. And if one of that point is very close to a cluster, it's very high the probability that that radioactive source that you seized on the ground, it comes from those manufacturers. And this is a big help on a site. In just one site, you can say, oh, this can come from that manufacturers. This sources can come from that radio pharmacy. It's a very powerful tool to assess, for example, the origin of your seized radioactive source. This is the meaning of this. This is a very powerful statistical and geometrical tool, the principal component analysis. So that was the search methodology. This is the modus operandi. So you have to compare, as I told you, two big sets, two big databases, your National Nuclear Forensics Library and your MORC samples library. If you are lucky, this MORC set can have inside just 2 or 3 radioactive sources, and then you are very, very, very lucky. But it can happen that in this MORC set you can have, for example, thousands or hundreds of radioactive pellets, or put a lot of a bag with an unknown powder inside, maybe uranium powder inside. You can have a lot of samples. So in the general case, you have to compare two big databases. How to perform this comparison? This assessment is carried out comparing values of homogeneous sets of parameters. This means that, first of all, you have to select the most useful MORC parameters inside this matrix. Again, you have to select the most useful parameter, because, for example, you can realize that the administrative parameters are not important, they ignore them. You can say that one physical parameter is not important, based on, of course, on other physical consideration, based on your expertise and so on. Then you can ignore them. So reducing the number of parameters. So reducing the MORC set. So first, this is the first step. You have to reduce the MORC parameters. Once you have reduced the set of your MORC parameters, you have to do the same thing on your National Nuclear Forensics Library, because, of course, in order to have an effective comparison, you have to compare the same type of parameters for each sample and the same number of parameters, of course, otherwise no comparison. It's possible from a mathematical point of view. So this is equivalent to reducing the NNFL database parameter set and the MORC parameter set to the same size and type. This is a very important first step. So the selection and reduction of the MORC parameters have to be applied to the useful parameter of the NNFL, and then you can perform your comparison. How to do this comparison? Narrowing down at each step, narrowing down the investigation fields. So reducing the set of parameters for both library. That means narrowing down the investigation field. So at each step, your investigation field is reduced to the minimum number of samples with the maximum number of positive correspondences. So at a certain point, you can build an investigation matrix where correspondences and positive correspondences and negative correspondences can be labeled using, for example, a chromatic code. For example, the green one for positive correspondences and the red one for negative correspondences. This is, for example, the universe of correspondences formalized through Venn diagrams. And you imagine that this investigation matrix is almost the last step of your investigations. After this step, if you are very lucky, you can have 3 or 4 MORC radioactive sources that have to be compared with tens of known radioactive material belonging to your national nuclear forensics library. If you have this situation, then you are very lucky, and with some subsequent steps, you can reduce to the last small set your investigative field. The final comparison between MORC values and the corresponding NNFL values can be carried out using statistical techniques. So the final comparison can be properly done only using statistical techniques. Here I am mentioning 2 statistical techniques. One is the graded decision framework that was accepted and established in the frame of the ITWG working group. And the other one is a statistical compatibility criterion based on hypothesis tests that usually we use in our group to perform this final comparison between 2 data sets. And the final result can help giving the right perception of the overall uncertainty to the judge in a courtroom. Of course, I cannot go into details because the time is almost over. But only in this way you can go in front of a judge in a courtroom and you can present him the result with a very solid scientific background. And then you have to speak to the judge and make him to understand what you mean. And maybe this is the more complicated point at the end of your nuclear forensic investigation. These are the references. All those information I showed you, you can find all this information in these 2 IAEA publications. The first one is Nuclear Security Series number 22G, is the radiological crime scene management. The second one is Nuclear Security Series number 2G1, that is nuclear forensics in support of investigation. Of course, these 2 publications can give you all those hints about the management of radiological crime scene and hints about the management, the conduct of a nuclear forensic investigation. But please keep in mind that, of course, these 2 publications are not enough to explain to you everything can happen. You always have to add to the knowledge inside this publication your expertise, coming from your experiences, coming from your thoughts. Only in that way you can have the biggest picture of a nuclear forensic investigation. And the third one is, of course, the National Nuclear Forensics Library Guideline. I just wrote for the ITWG, and it's going to be officially issued in July, in the first 3 days of July, when there will be the annual meeting of the ITWG in Bologna, because I'm organizing that meeting in Bologna, and it will be the first 3 days of July. And so that the international guideline will be officially issued in that meeting. So concluding, we have just seen the radiological crime scene management as the first step of the overall nuclear forensics. I told you nuclear forensics. I like to talk about nuclear forensics in its widest meanings, including the radiological crime scene management and the nuclear forensic investigation, from the categorization and characterization, going through the nuclear forensic interpretation, to the arrest of the criminal, or the prosecutors and the prosecution, till to the final trial in the courtroom. Okay, this is the nuclear forensics in its widest meanings. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention. And now we have more or less 15 minutes for comments and questions. So I'm waiting. So don't be shy. Ask me whatever. If you think that you have silly things in mind, they are the best. Ask. Nothing? Okay, I will ask you something. Someone of you have already dealt with these topics? Have you already heard about all this information and all these topics, except the Eva's presentation this morning, of course? No? If these topics were all new for you. Okay, then I hope to have given you useful information. I hope. Anyway, I'm still here. If you have some questions, don't be shy, please ask. Thank you. Okay.
Mica.
Sei schiantato. Sono un generalista.
Adesso va meglio.
Colmo delle palline.
Nuclear battery. Nuclear battery.
Ah, beh, sì,
col selo così.